Years ago, I went to an investment conference, and they actually hired Sting to perform. And he stood up and he said, "Hi, my name is Sting. I play music for money." So in that vein, my name is Doug, and what I help people do is try to cut through all the noise in the media business. And I do that by focusing on the key structural, fundamental changes that are going on. I try to do that in a way that's unbiased, and I try to do it where possible, supported by data. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to zoom out a little bit here. It's going to be higher level, and I apologize in advance. I'm going to go relatively quickly. I'm happy to send you one of these slides. That's my website. There's a contact page on there, so you can reach me. Happy to send it. My one-sentence summary of what's happening in media is that the last 15 years have really been defined by the disruption of content distribution, and that the next 15 years, or next decade, or next 5 years, are going to be defined by the disruption of content creation. So I'm going to start with this first one, and how it got us to where we are today, what we're all kind of dealing with, and then I'll talk about the next one, this disruption that's coming. You can find, as Vincent alluded to, a lot of writing, much more detail about this stuff on my Substack. If you want to pretend to hold up your phone and sign up right now, you could. It's free, so everyone, you know, no one's even pretending. Anyway, if you like pretending, you can. I'll put it up at the end too, because I'll have earned it by then. So, you know, let's talk about this first disruption first. As a starting point, the value that resides in any value chain is a function of the moats in that value chain. This is like an Econ 101 concept. If you have a business with no barriers to entry, there will be no profits. And historically, there were two big moats in media. One was distribution, because it was very capital intensive and therefore expensive. And the other one was content creation or production, whatever you want to call it, because it's very risky, right? And as you know, over the last couple decades, the distribution moat fell because of two general purpose technologies, digitization and the internet. Prior to digitization, media distribution was siloed, right? You had different atomic units of what media was, you had different distribution infrastructure, different form factors, and different cost drivers. And you got your news in a newspaper, you went to the movies, you watched a DVD on a DVD, whatever. But digitization, what it did is it made the atomic unit of all media the bit. And then the internet came along and it unified distribution of all those bits on one network. And so now all media is conveyed in bits on basically the same network and generally the same form factors, right? And those innovations caused the cost of distribution in media to functionally move towards zero for two reasons. The first is that they unbundled information from infrastructure. You no longer need to own the underlying infrastructure to be in the media distribution business. And what this is showing you is, for Charter, the biggest cable company in the US, it spends about 20% of its revenue on CapEx, and Netflix spends basically zero. The second reason is that while media distribution used to be on an upward sloping cost curve driven by like labor costs and, you know, healthcare insurance premiums and the cost of physical assets, it is now subject to a downward sloping cost curve. So the left side is basically healthcare insurance, you know, COLA adjustments, wage adjustments, and the right is effectively Moore's law. And so what happened was the cost to move bits around moved to zero, and that's why, you know, you see that one moat disappearing. That's why Netflix and Spotify and Apple Music and Roblox and Business Insider and Substack and all those things exist only because of this change, right? The aftermath of that disruption is the four structural trends that I talk about that we're all kind of dealing with today that dominate the business today, and that is stagnation of the revenue pie, the fragmentation of attention, the disintermediation of traditional intermediaries, and concentration of power in a handful of platforms and attention in a handful of hits. And I'll just briefly talk about each of these. So stagnation, ultimately, as you know, the media business is about monetizing attention and engagement. The problem is there's really no more attention to go around. In the US, and I think this is kind of representative of the West, sorry, you can see that US adults right now spend about 75% of their waking time with media. And on the bottom, I don't know why it keeps doing that. On the bottom, what you can see is a time series of this data. Wait, maybe you could see as a time series data. And anyway, the point is that time spent with media grew around the advent of mobile, and then we had kind of a COVID bump, and it's really been stagnant since then. All right, well, I guess we're on this slide now. So with time spent not growing, it's very hard for the overall revenue pie to grow also. And then what this chart is showing you is that globally, media entertainment, so the blue line is nominal, the orange line is inflation adjusted, that media is not growing globally, and this is all media. This is old media, new media, everything, gaming, print, social, whatever. There's no growth in the business. The second trend I mentioned is fragmentation of attention, and I think everyone knows that our attention is fragmenting, but let's talk about why it's happening. It's happening for two reasons. The first reason, which is obvious, is that there's this explosion of content due to falling barriers to entry. It's not just distribution, which I just mentioned, but also to a lesser degree, you have lower barriers to entry in production, in marketing, and in monetization. Again, not evenly across media and to different degrees, but it's happening. And so here, what you see is there's been this explosion in content, particularly in the creator economy, largely driven by creators. So for instance, in Hollywood, what you can see here is that by my math, Hollywood puts out about 15,000 hours a year of, it's that blip you can barely see, 15,000 hours a year of fresh TV and movies, and there's about 300 million hours uploaded to YouTube each year, so that's 20,000 times as much. In music, what you can see here is that independent creators upload more than 20 times as many tracks per day as the major labels. And here, what you can see is in gaming that there are roughly, let's say, 10,000 titles available on a platform like Xbox, and there's 1 million titles available on iOS. So I said there's two reasons that this is happening, this fragmentation is happening. Again, an explosion of content. The pushback that I hear a lot is like, well, yeah, but a lot of it's crap. And that's true. A lot of it is empirically just really bad and not watchable, and most people don't watch it. But the second reason that this is happening is because the consumer definition of quality is changing. So if you think about what's happening in TV, the definition of quality used to be these things, big budgets and high production values and prestige, names associated with it. And what's happening now is that there's this emerging definition of quality. And all those things are still important, but there's these new emerging elements. Is it authentic? Is it relatable? Is it relevant to me? Does it provide social currency? Is it trending? And so you can see this changing definition happening really across the media business. So one thing that's interesting is you don't see fragmentation between media. You don't see a lot of fragmentation happening between formats, between audio and video and gaming. Those are really different use cases. They serve different need states. Where you really see fragmentation happening is within media. So in video, as an example, I estimate that YouTube, TikTok, Reels, mostly, social video is now about 25% of all video consumption in the United States. In music, the majors have been, oh no, my arrows got messed up, but the majors have been remarkably resilient, but even they're losing share every year. You can see here that according to Spotify, 5-6 years ago, the majors and Merlin, which is the coalition of the largest independents, had about 90% share of streams. Now, by this year, it's going to be closer to 70. And what you can see here in gaming is that a decade ago, casual gaming, mobile gaming didn't exist, and now it's half the business. So you have this fragmentation happening everywhere. And this creator economy is getting pretty big. By my estimates, that's the blue bar, and the orange bar is what you could call corporate media. So if you look at the total media industry, which is roughly 1.6 trillion, the creator media economy, by my math, is about 15% of that, and has represented roughly half of all the growth in media in the last 4 years. All right, the third structural theme is disintermediation of the traditional intermediaries. And this chart just shows the kind of historical media value chain, creators and producers and aggregators, and you guys all know this. Another way to look at it is this, is that the most powerful entities in media historically have really been middlemen between creatives and consumers. Major labels, video game publishers, news publishers, studios, they're all middlemen between who creates and who consumes. But what's happening is that technology is systematically making it easier for creatives or creators to do that all themselves. So you look at this emerging value chain, you look at the blue box in the middle, creative to creator, you can see that creators are really moving down the stack. They're taking on more functions themselves. Consumers are also taking on more of a role too, in terms of actually getting more actively involved in marketing and increasingly in the production of the content itself. And so what's happening is that creatives have more bargaining power than ever over the intermediaries, or in some cases, obviously they can just circumvent them altogether. The last trend is about what happens when so much consumption is occurring on networks. And before I mentioned that the internet unbundled information from infrastructure, it made it a lot cheaper to distribute content, but also it did another thing, is it connected everybody on a big network. And the thing about networks is that every node on the network, everything, every person on the network affects everybody else, so they're subject to these really powerful positive feedback loops that make strong things stronger. And so on the supply side, you have these network effects, which result in these incredibly powerful platforms, and you've seen this kind of data before. This is a little dated, but this is showing you the market cap of the major platforms versus media. The point here is that if you added up all of media combined, it is smaller than the smallest platform, Meta. And this is showing you something think we've seen before if you were in the earlier sessions. But the red dots, the red bars again, although they're closer to dots, are media companies, and this is showing you global advertising revenues last year. And the point of this is that the media business is no longer dominated by what we call media companies. On the demand side, or the consumer side, these positive feedback loops, what they do is they tend to amplify popularity. So you end up with these like huge hits. You have these big cultural touchdowns. You have Taylor Swift and Barbenheimer and GTA 6 and stuff like that, but you also have this incredibly long tail. So even though the tail is getting longer, the head's getting higher, and you end up with what are these what are called power law distributions, where you have, like I said, this very skinny head, this dwindling middle, and this ever longer tail. And what this analysis is showing you is this is something I did for box office, Patreon, patrons, shows on Netflix, and songs on Spotify. In a lot of cases, when you look at the time series, these things are getting ever more extreme. And so that creates a problem for the big media companies for a few reasons. One, the business is getting riskier. The second thing is the middle's going away, where they used to make a lot of money. And the third thing is the top talent has, again, more bargaining power than ever because they know they're at the head of the curve. So that's kind of where we are today in media. Like I said, stagnation of the revenue pie, fragmentation of attention, the waning importance of the intermediaries, and that you have a concentration of both power and attention. And so none of this is good for traditional media. Value is shifting to platforms and consumers and creators. And what you can see here is that this sweaty guy, that media is really being squeezed between, on the one hand, platforms that are just massive and don't really need to make money in media, and on the other, this kind of infinite pool of creators. But so I haven't gotten to the second part of the talk yet. All of this stuff is a lagging indicator of the last disruption, right? And I think there's another disruption coming. And so the idea here is that just as packets were a general purpose technology for moving bits around, that tokens are a new general purpose technology for making the bits. And so, what that would do is, as this other moat fades, is that would bring down the other moat. And I'm sure you're aware of this, but these just to focus on video, which is like the most costly and technically demanding form of media. As you know, one person can write a book. Billie Eilish and her brother can create a multi-platinum album. One person can't create a great movie yet, right? You still need hundreds or thousands of people, but these tools are moving really, really fast. And just if you play, this is the canonical.
That's hot.
All right, you can move. You could. So that was that was only really 2 years. That was less than 2 years ago, and this is the compilation video of VO2. Um, when you get to the DJ and you get to the scientist, I mean, you're getting to the point where like you wouldn't know that this is not a real person. We'll get to the scientist. When you look at like the imperfections in her skin, I mean, you're getting really, really close. We're not over the uncanny valley yet. When you start to, we could talk about things like lip sync and whatever. But if you go to the next, I don't know if you guys have the next video. I think it's impressive. But so this is what's happened in less than 2 years. Okay. So a lot of people focus on this question: is Gen AI coming to Hollywood? And I think we're going to talk about it in the next session. I think it's a valid question, and I won't belabor this. This is a bit of an eye chart, but I think the answer is yeah, it's going to come to Hollywood. It's going to be somewhat incremental. The point of this chart, and again, I'm happy to send anyone these slides, is just that if you're starting from existing workflows, it's going to be used. It's already being used now in pre-production. You're seeing some stuff in post. You're seeing like first pass edit. You're seeing stuff happening in localization. You're seeing stuff with environments. People playing around with like establishing shots and B-roll and stuff like that, but it's going to happen in a relatively incremental way if you're coming at it from the standpoint, the lens of existing workflows. I think actually this is the more important question, the more interesting question, which is not whether it's coming to Hollywood, whether it's coming for Hollywood. And to me, I think the question is, or the risk is not that Hollywood is going to replace creatives with AI, but that creatives are going to replace. Are you going to use AI to replace Hollywood? And so my answer is yes. I think that there's a real risk that Gen AI is going to accelerate the low-end disruption of Hollywood by creator content that's already underway. And what this chart is showing you is that YouTube is already the #1 streaming service in the United States to televisions, right? So the argument has long been that YouTube is not the same use case as TV. It's cats and people slipping on ice or whatever. But this is the exact same use case. This is people watching YouTube on a television in their living room. And it has a higher share, if you did the math here, than Disney Plus, Hulu, Max, Peacock, Tubi, Paramount Plus, and Pluto combined. And the green line here is showing you the time series of this, which is it's up 50% in less than 2 years. So YouTube is already in the process of disrupting traditional TV. And the way low-end disruption typically works is the first thing it picks off is the least demanding customers. The least demanding customers are kids. The most popular kids show in the world is CoComelon on YouTube. The next least demanding customer set is unscripted, and the most popular unscripted show in the world, if you think about it, is Mr. Beast. So this is already happening, and this is just showing you kind of a graphical representation of this kind of low-end disruption coming from the bottom. And the idea here is that these tools throw gas on the fire. They enable creator content to continue blurring the quality distinction between creator media and corporate media. And so the point, I guess the key here, the key takeaway is that Gen AI does not need to produce comparable quality to be doesn't need to be blockbuster movie quality or premium scripted TV quality to be extremely disruptive. If it can produce, as it says in the title of the slide, if it could produce 80% of the quality at less than 10% of the cost, that would really upend the media business. And what this slide is showing you is it's comparing the costs of, I don't know if you guys know Where the Robots Grow. It's actually created by a local studio here called AImation or Pigeon Shrine, whatever, one's a subset of the other. But if you look at the difference here, it's pretty stark. And so, if you watch this thing on YouTube, you'd say, is this a Pixar quality movie? No, probably to you it's not. If you're 5, it might be close. Another point is that Gen AI is not only going to be used to make things more cheaply. That's mostly how we talk about it, as an efficiency tool. But in media, the first use of a new medium is almost always just an imitation of the way the old medium was used, right? Like the first movies were televised stage plays, and the first time you looked at a magazine on the internet, it was basically like a PDF. They didn't have hypertext links or infinite scroll or any of that kind of stuff. Eventually, what will happen is that people will come to understand, or creatives will come to learn what are the unique attributes of generative AI and make new stuff with it. So you think about what are those unique attributes? Well, it's a lot cheaper. You can see some of the things you might be able to do with it. What does it mean when video can be rendered real time, right? What does it mean when all video is inherently three-dimensional? And so you start to get these things like emergent stories, personalization, interactive stories, stories that aren't constrained by physics, whatever it is, and no one knows yet what those new forms will be. Just like if you told me, 5 years ago that there'd be a YouTuber, a Korean YouTuber with 35 million subscribers who eats cookies. What is ASMR? I don't even know what that is. It's like the weirdest. Anyway, maybe you guys are all big ASMR fans. I don't really understand the whole concept, but in any case, we don't know how this is going to be employed. But whatever it is, it's going to be yet another competitor for a finite amount of time. Drawing to a close here. Another thing to keep in mind is when you think about the comparison between the last disruption and this disruption is that this one could happen a lot faster for a few reasons. One is that we're just dealing with internet scale, right? And before I talked about this 15,000 hours of traditional content versus 300 million hours on YouTube, it means that if 0.01% of that YouTube content is considered comparable, competitive, but not comparable, competitive, that would be 30,000 hours. That would be twice Hollywood's output a year. The other point is that the last disruption required a massive lift in terms of broadband infrastructure and consumer behavior, adopting broadband, people adopting streaming, all that stuff is in place. So this could happen a lot faster for that reason. And the last thing is I think it's going to be very challenging for the major studios to head this off because they're really encumbered by a number of things, internal politics, calcification, the things that all big companies have, but they also have a problem because of concerns about talent backlash and lack of legal clarity. So just to finish up here, what I'm saying is that over the next 5 to 10 years, what's going to happen is that infinite supply is going to slam into finite demand. But let's finish up positive here. The good news is that when one input becomes abundant, other things become scarce. I started off the talk talking about moats. There will be new moats. And so the question that everybody in media should be trying to figure out is what are the new moats that we're going to have in an infinite content world? And here are just a few ideas. Good ideas are always going to be at a premium, obviously. Distribution and curation, those choke points will be more valuable than ever. Proprietary technology, whatever that might mean. Consumer time and attention, proprietary data, marketing muscle, being able to cut through the clutter. The authenticity and provenance of content is going to become ever more important. People are going to want to understand the humanity behind things. Being able to foster fandoms and communities around content will be more valuable. Premium IP will be more valuable. Library, anyway, you can read this yourself. And I think the reason I circled this is that all of these things within this box are really the province of big media companies. They're all within the realm of, they're all within the control of big media. So let me stop there. We don't have time for any questions or.